White billionaire family humiliated a black woman at party. Then she canceled their $5 billion deal. Before dive in, please subscribe to the channel. The chandeliers of the Van Craftoft estate glowed like constellations caught in crystal, casting soft light over marble floors that gleamed under the shoes of the city's most powerful elite. It was an evening orchestrated for spectacle, a gala that promised whispered alliances, billion-dollar deals, and the smug reassurance that old money still dictated the pulse of society. For Alani, stepping through those gilded doors was like walking into a storm that had been waiting for her. She wasn't unknown, not to herself, not to the world that truly mattered, but to the people in this room, the Eleanor Van Craftoft of the world. She was invisible, or worse, something to ridicule. The stare started the moment she crossed the threshold. Her dress, a sleek satin emerald gown, caught the soft light beautifully. It was custom-made, its clean lines speaking of understated sophistication. Yet the whispers began before she had taken 10 steps. "Who invited her?" a man muttered, his champagne flute tilting as his lip curled. "Security must have slipped," another guest replied, voice low but sharp enough for her to hear. At the entrance, the guard had already hesitated. His eyes flicked over her invite twice, as though expecting a forgery. "Are you sure this is for tonight, ma'am?" His emphasis on ma'am carried a doubt that made her jaw tighten. She had smiled, steady, the way she always had when the world decided she didn't belong. "Yes," she said simply, and she stepped inside. The first strike came from Blair, Eleanor's daughter, her hair an ice blonde sheet that caught the light almost theatrically. She looked Alani up and down like a critic before a painting she intended to dismiss. "That dress," Blair said, her voice dripping with something sweeter than poison. "Mid-tears in it? Charming effort, though almost convincing." Laughter rippled among the circle of guests gathered around her. Alani's face betrayed nothing, though inside she felt the sting. She pressed her fingers against the smooth stem of her glass, steadying herself. Eleanor Van Craftoft appeared then, regal in sapphire silk, her diamond necklace catching fire under the chandeliers. Her presence drew the room's energy like gravity itself. Eleanor's gaze landed on Alani, cool and assessing. She didn't speak at first, just let her eyes sweep over her like she was calculating her worth. And then she smiled, a smile sharpened to cut. "My dear," Eleanor said, voice carrying easily to the low hum of conversation. "How quaint of you to join us. It's always refreshing when diversity finds its way into these circles." A hush followed, not silence, but the thick pause where people decided whether to laugh or look away. Some chuckled, others stared into their glasses. Alani's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to slice back, but her training, years of swallowing words, of playing the long game, held her in check. Carter Van Craftoft, Eleanor's son, joined and then, smirking. He was handsome in the way spoiled heirs often are, entitled, careless. His suit cut to perfection. "Careful, mother," Carter said loudly, eyes flicking toward Alani. "She might think she belongs here. And then where would we be? Next thing you know, she'll be bidding for the penthouse at the new development." Blair laughed again, a tinkling sound meant to charm but soaked in malice. The heat rose in Alani's chest. Her grandmother's voice echoed faintly in her mind. "Hold your fire. Patience is a blade." She smiled faintly, lowering her gaze to her glass. To them, it looked like submission. To her, it was calculation. But the night wasn't done sharpening its knives. As dinner began, Alani found herself placed deliberately at the far end of the long mahogany table, near the server's entrance. Guests whispered about the seating arrangement as though it were accidental, though the intent was clear. She was meant to be sidelined, peripheral, unseen. From her seat, she could hear Eleanor's laughter dominating the other end, could see Blair leaning into conversations where deals worth millions floated between clinking glasses. Every so often, someone's gaze drifted toward Alani, followed by a whispered comment and a stifled laugh. Who is she, anyway? Some hanger-on, no doubt. Not even old money. New money, if at all. You can smell it. Her nails dug lightly into her palm beneath the tablecloth, but outwardly, she remained composed, sipping water, her eyes steady. It was Harrison Van Craftoft, Eleanor's husband, who sealed the first act of humiliation, broad-shouldered and gray-haired. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never once questioned his entitlement to power. As a toast was raised, his eyes landed on Alani. "And let us not forget," he said smoothly, "that not everyone is cut out for this world. Some should simply be honored to watch from the sidelines." Glasses clinked. Laughter rippled. The words weren't directed by name, but every eye in the room followed his gaze to where she sat, isolated, the heat of humiliation burning under her skin. Alani set her glass down slowly. She didn't speak. Not yet. But inside, the storm began to coil. The laughter at Harrison's remarks still echoed in her ears, though the room had moved on. Deals were being whispered, hands shaken, alliances formed like threads weaving an invisible net that stretched across the table. To anyone watching, Alani appeared forgotten, swallowed into shadows at the end of the mahogany expanse. But invisibility was never absence. Sometimes it was cover. Her eyes drifted across the glittering table, but her mind moved elsewhere, backward, into memories that had shaped her. She was 8 the first time her grandmother took her to clean houses on the wealthy side of the city. The estates rose like fortresses, with gates that creaked open reluctantly, as if to remind them both that they were only being tolerated on the inside. Her grandmother's hands, rough with calluses, never shook as she scrubbed marble counters or polished stair rails. She hummed as she worked, old songs from her island that no one in the city understood. When Alani asked why she had to keep humming, her grandmother answered softly, "Because, child, if I forget the song, I forget myself. And when they laugh at me, I must remember who I am." Alani had carried that lesson like an ember in her chest. By 15, she was tutoring other children in math after school to earn money. By 20, she had 2 jobs and a scholarship, slipping into boardrooms not through doors but through determination. She watched how men in expensive suits spoke, how they wielded silence like a weapon, how they made people wait before answering questions. She learned their language, even as they pretended she wasn't in the room. They never saw her coming. Back in the present, Alani's gaze lingered on Eleanor Van Craftoft as the matriarch leaned back in her chair, her laughter loud, her jewels catching the light. Eleanor believed herself untouchable, the queen of this glittering empire. Alani's lips curved faintly. Queens fall, too. She remembered another boardroom, far from the polished grandeur of the Van Craftoft estate. It had been in Tokyo 5 years earlier, when she walked into a meeting with a group of steel executives who had dismissed her on sight. One of them had muttered something in Japanese he thought she wouldn't understand. A woman like this shouldn't even be in the room. She had waited, quiet, until their smugness settled into the air like dust. And then she had spoken in fluent Japanese, laying out a strategy so precise that the room had gone silent. By the end of the meeting, the men were leaning forward, pens scratching desperately across paper as they tried to keep up with her. That deal had become the foundation of her first billion-dollar acquisition. The world never saw it because she didn't allow it to. Her empire was not built on headlines but on silence, on the invisibility they so freely offered her. Another burst of laughter from Blair pulled her back into the gala. She saw the girl's manicured hand covering her mouth, whispering into a friend's ear. Their eyes flicked toward Alani. It didn't sting, not anymore. It only reminded her of every boardroom, every courtroom, every polished office where she'd been underestimated. The pattern was always the same. The dismissals, the smirks, the disbelief, and then the reckoning. Her grandmother's voice rose again, clear and steady in her memory. Patience is a blade. She let her gaze wander across the table, observing. David, the chief financial officer, leaned into Eleanor's ear, whispering urgently. His eyes darted once toward his phone, then toward her. He knew, not everything, but enough. That knowledge flickered in his posture, in the nervous way he sipped his drink. Alani didn't move. She simply breathed, calm and unshaken, like the ocean before the swell. She thought of her grandmother again, gone now, but never far. She remembered her sitting on the porch of their small house, her hands folded, eyes watching the horizon. "One day, you'll walk into rooms like these," she had said. "And when you do, Don't raise your voice. Let them laugh. Let them underestimate. Then show them who you are. Her grandmother hadn't lived long enough to see it. But Alani carried her words like scripture. She looked down at her glass, watching the faint tremor of the champagne as she set it back on the table. The storm inside her had sharpened, focused. The blade was ready. They thought she was silent because she was small. They thought her smile meant surrender. But Alani knew the truth. Silence was strategy. And tonight, it would be the prelude to ruin. The meal was a parade of excess. Gold-rimmed plates, caviar nestled on porcelain spoons, truffle shavings drifting like snow over risotto. Every detail was curated to remind the guests that this was not merely dinner but theater, a stage for wealth. At the head of the table, Eleanor presided with the ease of a monarch. Every gesture, her hand raised for silence, her booming laugh, commanded attention. Alani, seated at the farthest edge, watched as if from another world. Yet even from that distance, she felt the spotlight of ridicule turn on her again. So tell us, Blair's voice cut across the table, brittle and sweet. She leaned forward, chin propped on her palm, her bracelets jingling. What is it that you do, really? I mean, when you're not dressing up? Laughter followed, a ripple that traveled the length of the table. Alani's hand rested lightly on the linen napkin in her lap. She looked up, her eyes steady, and met Blair's gaze. I build, she said simply. Blair blinked, thrown by the brevity. Build. Yes, Alani replied, her voice calm. Things you can't see, but that hold everything you rely on. A few guests exchanged puzzled looks. Blair smirked, mistaking her vagueness for vagueness born of shame. How poetic. Harrison lifted his glass, his gray eyes fixed on Alani, with a look halfway between amusement and disdain. Ah, the philosopher among us. Tell me, my dear, do these invisible things you build pay the rent? A sharper laugh followed this time. Even Eleanor allowed herself a chuckle, low and satisfied. Alani didn't flinch. More than the rent, she said softly. Only David, the CFO, seemed uneasy. His eyes darted toward Alani again, then back to Eleanor, as though calculating something. The courses kept coming, and with them, the escalation. By the time dessert arrived, delicate chocolate spheres had cracked open to reveal gold-dusted mousse. The cruelty had grown casual, lazy, the kind that flow when people no longer fear being challenged. Carter, leaning back with wine-flushed cheeks, smirked openly. Blair, be kind. Maybe she's just here for inspiration, a little taste of the good life. Or charity, Blair added with theatrical sigh. Mother, you're always so generous. Eleanor smiled thinly, her diamond earrings catching the light. Generosity has its place, but so does knowing where one belongs. The words dropped into the space between them like a gavel. Around the table, a few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others smirked. The line was clear, drawn sharp across the gleaming mahogany. Alani held her posture, serene, but her silence now was less cover and more tension wound-tight. The storm inside her pressed against its cage. She noticed the details others missed. The way David's hand lingered on his phone under the table, his thumb scrolling nervously. The way Eleanor's laughter faltered when he leaned in too close, whispering something into her ear. The way her smile twitched just slightly afterward. They were nervous, not because of her yet, but because of something bigger, something brewing behind the scenes. Alani already knew what it was. Their empire, the Van Kraftoff name, the glamour, the dominance, it was propped on a single deal, a deal whose threads were already sliding through her fingers. All it would take was a tug, and tonight she would tug. Another toast was raised. Harrison stood, his suit jacket pulling taut across his broad shoulders. To power, he declared, to knowing who we are, and to ensuring that the order of things remains as it should. Glasses lifted, the room shimmering with obedience. Alani lifted hers too, but her eyes never left Eleanor's. For the first time that night, she allowed her lips to curve, not in submission, but in a secret only she understood. The end game was close. The echo of Harrison's toast lingered like smoke in the air. Crystal clinked against crystal, and the sound seemed to seal the evening into a perfect tableau of arrogance. Eleanor smiled, her posture regal, her family arrayed around her like courtiers. But then David leaned forward again. His whisper wasn't as discreet this time, and Alani, even at her distance, caught the words. The numbers won't hold. If the deal collapses. Eleanor's diamond-ringed hand snapped to her glass. It won't, she hissed, but her eyes flickered just for a second, betraying the first crack. Alani felt the shift ripple through the air. It was time. She set her glass down deliberately, the faint clink carrying farther than it should have. Her chair slid back across the polished floor, the sound a startling scrape in a hush of wealth and conversation. Every head turned. She rose slowly, her emerald gown catching the light. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The sudden silence made her words sharp as steel. Eleanor Van Craftoft, Alani said, her tone smooth but unyielding. You've spent this evening reminding me where I do not belong. Mocking, dismissing, laughing. Eleanor blinked, then allowed herself a cool, amused smile. My dear, if you're uncomfortable, perhaps. Be quiet. The words sliced the room open. Gasps echoed down the table. No one spoke to Eleanor like that. Alani's eyes never left hers. You see me as nothing more than decoration, a mistake at your table. But let me show you something. She reached into the clutch at her side and pulled out a metallic card. Sleek, brushed steel, its weight commanding. She set it gently on the table, sliding it forward with one manicured finger. Eleanor's eyes dropped. The logo gleamed in the light. Astra Capital Holdings. The name hung in the air like thunder. Around the table, whispers began. Wait, Astra. The global firm? She owns. Eleanor's face paled, her composure fracturing. This is a joke. Alani tilted her head slightly, a predator's patience in the gesture. Is it? You see, while you were laughing, I was listening. While you were sipping wine, I was buying silence. And while you were mocking my dress, Eleanor... She leaned forward just enough that the diamond in Eleanor's necklace caught her reflection. I was buying your empire. The words detonated. Carter shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his father. Blair's painted smile froze, brittle as porcelain. Harrison's hand tightened around his glass until the stem nearly cracked. Eleanor swallowed, her voice low. What are you talking about? David knows, Alani said softly, turning her gaze to the CFO. His face drained of color. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Alani straightened, her presence filling the space in a way no jewels or chandeliers could compete with. The deal you're counting on, the one holding this glittering facade together, was mine to approve. I already signed the papers this morning. And I signed them to collapse everything you own. A stunned silence fell. The only sound was the faint crackle of candles on the table. Lies, Blair hissed, her voice trembling. She's bluffing. But then David finally spoke, his voice hoarse. She isn't. All eyes swung to him. He couldn't meet Eleanor's gaze. The contract she controls a majority share. Eleanor's chair scraped violently against the floor as she half rose, her hands trembling. You can't do this. Alani's eyes locked on hers, calm, steady. I already have. She turned slightly, enough for her voice to carry the full weight of command. Cancel everything, David. The CFO hesitated. Then, with the slow gravity of a man watching his own execution, he pulled out his phone and began typing. A ripple of shock coursed through the guests. Some gasped, some whispered furiously, others simply stared, frozen. Eleanor's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. You'll ruin us, she spat. Alani leaned closer, her voice a whisper meant to slice. No, Eleanor, you ruined yourselves. You mistook cruelty for power. You mocked the wrong woman. She straightened fully, the room parting around her as if to make space for the storm she had become. Gasps rose again as she stepped away from the table, her heels clicking on the marble floor, each strike like a drumbeat announcing their downfall. Behind her, the Van Craftoff dynasty was unraveling in real time. Eleanor's composure shattered Harrison shouted for answers. Blair covered her face with trembling hands, and Carter slammed his fist on the table, powerless. Alani didn't look back. She had come invisible. She was leaving indelible. The room was still, suspended in a frozen tableau of shock and defeat. Alani's heels echoed against the marble as she walked toward the grand double doors. Each step carried a weight no gold or jewel could rival, the weight of justice delivered. She didn't glance back at Eleanor, who sat slumped, her mask of arrogance shattered, or at Harrison, who now looked small and desperate, like a boy caught in a storm he couldn't command. Blair's trembling hands clutched her pearls. Carter's jaw tightened, but no one dared speak. Outside, the cool night air greeted her like an old friend. The city lights shimmered, indifferent yet welcoming, a mirror of her resolve. Alani paused for a moment, letting the tension slip from her shoulders. The anger, the ridicule, the endless judgment, they were gone. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. A single text. Congratulations. The board is in awe. A small smile curved her lips. She had not only survived their scorn, she had outmaneuvered a dynasty, a fortress of wealth and pride built on cruelty. The world had assumed she was small, powerless, invisible. Tonight, she proved them all wrong. Her reflection in the glass of the building's lobby caught her eye. Emerald gown, steel card still in her purse, her posture unbroken. Alani had always been underestimated. She would always be underestimated. But never again. As she stepped into her waiting car, the city hummed beneath her, alive with possibility. Deals would come, fortunes would shift, and lives would change, but she would always move forward on her terms. The Van Craft would recover, of course, but not as they were. The lesson lingered. Power taken by cruelty could crumble at the slightest touch of strategy and courage, and Alani had both in abundance. The engine roared, the city lights blurred, and Alani leaned back, letting the night embrace her. She was done hiding. She was done apologizing. She was finally, irrevocably unstoppable.